my disclosures are here, and I'm just going to talk about some very early and innovative research that we're doing in concert with Astute Medical and the University of Munster. So sort of beginning with this concept that Claudia introduced, this notion that functional decline and damage are two separate aspects of kidney injury. I realize that's a little bit difficult semantically because we call it acute kidney injury and have injury without injury. But remember, our initial impression of the kidney's injury is coming all from evidence of function. Urine output change, creatinine change, those are measures of renal function. They're really even measures of GFR. You have no GFR, have no urine output, you have no GFR. They're not terribly robust measures, anything other than glomerular function, although admittedly urine output is also a bit sensitive to tubular function as well. But we're pretty limited in our ability to assess damage without using these more novel biomarkers. And we do recognize that there are conditions that occur in which there is evidence of damage without loss of function and evidence of loss of function indeed without damage. And this sort of fits with our clinical perspective because we recognize that renal azotemia can occur, and although the majority of patients that are critically ill probably don't have a benign condition of prerenal azotemia, but certainly dehydration is associated with decreased function without, at least initially, without the loss of function. This is very well shown here with some very elegant studies that were done where you separate out a condition in which there's really an increase in creatinine, so decrease in function, but no at all, and in this case with an N-gallucosidase reporter assay, and this is volume depletion. Whereas LPS is associated with a very significant upregulation in damage markers. And we have this sense of an orderly process in which there's an injury that's occurred, in this case cardiac surgery, and you have a rise in biomarkers followed later a decrease in function. And of course, that scenario does play out in this particular situation sometimes. However, there are a variety of other potential scenarios. Not only can function decline after damage occurs, but function can begin to decline as damage is occurring. And even in some situations, there can be a functional decline that is without any damage until a certain point in which damage increases. But I'm going to make it even more complicated by introducing the concept of kidney stress from subclinical damage, and I'll show you why in a moment. And the stress response can occur coincidental to the injury, or it can actually occur before evidence of damage. We have lots of evidence to support this. Is some work from Santa Cantalupi's paper from actually 6 years ago now, in which epithelial cells with plasma from septic patients, you can see the recapitulation of the AKI event really at the cellular level simply by exposure to plasma. There's no microcirculation, there's no macrocirculation. This is purely a response to epithelial cells to these injurious molecules that in the intact kidney would be filtered at the glomerulus and delivered to the cells. When you take out those molecules by, in this case, use of a you can reverse that process and you can protect the kidney from this damage. And we recognize now that as these molecules are being delivered to the proximal tubule cells, both by filtration of the glomerulus, but also probably delivery via the peritubular capillary. Dendritic cells, it turns out, actually have foot processes that they actually reach down into the peritubular capillary and sample that peritubular flow, and are exquisitely sensitive to molecules coming across in the circulation that way, as well as interaction with circulating inflammatory cells such as neutrophils. All of this orchestrates a injury or at least a response in the proximal tubule cells. This response can actually stimulate cells adjacent to the cells that are sniffing out, if you will, these molecules that are being delivered. And this, along across the nephron, is something that we're now recognizing. This leads to a decrease in function by downregulating metabolic response, by downregulating sodium transfer, and as you decrease sodium chloride handling in the nephron, you ultimately result in increased chloride delivery to the thick ascending limb. Feedback, you reduce GFR. The molecules that are part of this carefully orchestrated response do seem to include cell cycle arrest markers TIMP2 and IGF-BP7, and clearly these molecules are highly sensitive for kidney injury, but they also seem to sense a expression in the cells that is not necessarily injurious, and I'll show you that in a minute. They're responding to stress. And what would that stress response be? It would be a number of different stressors on the cell, everything from oxidative stress to chemical stress to inflammatory stress, even epithelial cells respond to, including kidney epithelial cells, even though evolutionarily they haven't seen UV light in millions of years. The response is a protective response by suppressing cell progression under situations of stress. That's actually an adaptive and beneficial response, but it's an alarm that we're detecting in the kidney that tells us that the kidney is unhappy, the kidney is feeling stress, and as a response regulates its cell cycle. This is very important because there's very few things that the cell can do that is more expensive bioenergetically than reproducing all of its DNA, or potentially dangerous, because if there's any injury to that DNA and the cell goes into cell division, that cell will apoptose. And so it's like I tell my children, reproduction is expensive and dangerous. Don't do it until you're ready. And the epithelium that exact same perspective. So it turns out that these stimuli can be somewhat different across different etiologies. So this is something we noticed in the original Sapphire study, that if you had sepsis, if patients have sepsis, the TIMP2 signal was a bit stronger than the IGF-BP7 signal, and this was exactly opposite in patients developing from surgery. And of course, individuals vary, so the composite, even though overall it doesn't look like it's that much better than individual markers, there are individual patients for whom TIMP2 may be stronger than IGF-BP7, and you're better off measuring the sum of both. This is not affected in septic patients by non-renal organ failure, as shown in this study by Patrick Monterey, and it is seen also dramatically in this study that just came out in intensive care medicine experimental, in which we looked at the biomarker signatures in animals with experimental sepsis, and you can see that the TIMP2 signal is again stronger than the IGF-BP7 signal, but there's this really significant increase in sensitivity specificity when you combine both. It seems as though both stimuli, although they have a lot of overlap in terms of the kinds of etiologies that cause these markers to come up, they're not completely overlapping, and therefore using both molecules together appear to be much better than individual ones. And indeed, they do share this common mechanism of cell cycle arrest. I do think it's important to recognize, though, that these molecules, these stimuli, can be sub-injurious. They can be stress spurs, but not necessarily injurious. They can essentially measure the stress. They're essentially a psychiatrist for the kidney. kidney. Why do I say that? You can have oliguria, for example, and this is data, again, taken out of Sapphire. Louis Forney showed this data a couple of days ago. This is what happens when you look, for example, at patients that have isolated oliguria or isolated azotemia. And I'm showing you the odds ratios of death, dialysis, or progression to stage 3 AKI within 7 days. It's a different outcome than the way the test is used clinically right now, in which we use it to measure the likelihood of developing stage 2, stage 3 AKI in the next 12 to 24 hours. Now I'm showing you what happens when you use the test in the setting of either oliguria or azotemia that's already present, and you're looking at a longer-term outcome. If you have oliguria and you have no biomarker loss, and you have no stress, if you have decreased function but no stress, in fact, this odds ratio is below 1, although not statistically different from 1. There's no increased risk for this endpoint. If, on the other hand, the biomarker is positive, you have a significant, almost a fourfold increase in the risk of developing this test. If you have azotemia, you already have a biomarker that's positive in the sense of creatinine, so you have an increase that's not substantially increased at this cutoff. But if you get above 1, if you have even more stress, then again, you have this dramatic increase further in the risk of downstream events. The idea is that not all stress, and this is why I think stress is different than subclinical injury, that you can have a situation where you have a brief functional decline in response to, say, hypovolemia, and you have no stress. You have a situation where there's a renal tubular epithelial cell response with cell cycle arrest and downregulation of metabolism for a brief time, and this is good stress. You might even want to stimulate that stress because it's protective to the kidney. Although if it's present in your patient, you want to know why. Why is the kidney feeling stress? And is it something I can alleviate? But then there's also bad stress, and Claudio alluded to this in the sense that progressive, ongoing, or potentially recurring episodes of cell cycle arrest can lead to cell senescence and maladaptive repair and an inflammatory and a fibrotic phenotype that leads irrevocably to a chronic kidney disease phenotype. And this occurs because the cells, if they remain in cell cycle, are unable to proliferate and restore the lost cells, will result in migration of fibroblasts and fibrosis of that tubule and the clinical manifestation of chronic kidney disease. So if you're seeing a TIMP2 IGF-BP7 response, some stress, you have AKI, but you have evidence of stress, and it's important, even if a patient doesn't develop clinical manifestations of AKI, to understand why that stress is occurring. Obviously, if the levels of stress are even higher, then the risk of actual damage goes up and up. And of course, you can use this in an integrated response to patient management. If there's some evidence of stress and it's easily relieved by stopping the nephrotoxic drug or infusion, or in some cases doing the opposite in terms of restoring, reducing congestion with right heart failure, all of this might result in a rapid reduction of that stress and no evidence of AKI, whereas as the stress signal increases more, the risk of actual injury to the kidney is increased. And we see this in this paper by Jake Pointer, in which we looked at the long-term effects of very high. You can see that if you have no evidence of stress, there's a very low risk of death or dialysis at 1 year or 9 months in this case. If you have a bit of stress, that goes up, and then if you have a lot of stress, there's a dramatic increase in the risk of that endpoint. However, I've alluded to this idea that maybe we could take advantage, we could exploit this signal in cancer malignant cells evade chemotherapy in exactly the same way. They temporarily their function, reducing energy consumption and not proliferating, and they essentially protect themselves from the assaults of the oncologist to try to destroy those cells.
Various agents have been used, therefore, to force the cells to proliferate so that they can be targeted. Can we teach the kidney to behave in a similar way to protect itself? And this appears to be what's happening with remote ischemic preconditioning in high-risk patients. When you stimulate these patients, you get an increase in TI-NP2-IGFB just with the remote ischemic preconditioning maneuver, whereas the damage markers don't increase at all. Then you have the surgery and you have a big increase in damage as well as additional stress. This stress being injurious, whereas this stress is protective. This is what this looks like. If you stimulate the patient's kidney, the pattern recognition receptors in the epithelial cells with these molecules released from the ischemic muscle, you get protection, whereas the sham, the naive kidney, doesn't anticipate the surgery, and this kidney therefore goes on to develop AKI. Can we use pharmacologic approaches to do this? Is some early animal data in which you can see there is a signal that you can induce with, in this case, cyclosporin. Single dose of cyclosporin to stimulate cell cycle arrest in the kidney is protective in the setting of CLP experimental sepsis, and as well affects the bioenergetic and energetic conservation. These treatment options might include a variety of different molecules which can induce cell cycle arrest, which can conserve ATP, which can affect cell cycle progression. So in conclusion, markers of cell cycle arrest appear to be robust measures of risk for developing acute testing in the next 12 to 24 hours. This test has now been validated in over 2,000 patients. It's FDA approved in the United States and CE mark approved in Europe. The underlying biology is suggestive of an alarm phase where the markers increase before actual damage has occurred. They're essentially markers of renal stress. The lack of stress distinguishes functional adaptation from pathology. So when you see, for example, oliguria without evidence of stress, that's a functional decline without risk, whereas an increase in the biomarkers tells you they're unfolding. Measures to relieve stress might well prevent AKI, and you'll hear more about that at this meeting. Potential to exploit the mechanism as a therapy, in this case using, for example, RIPC, to stimulate these molecules, to stimulate this response, may be protective from subsequent injury. And there's even a potential to use more novel agents adapted from cancer chemotherapy to stimulate this response in the kidney. With that, I thank you for your attention.